The crew of the Kalinda thought they had snagged something heavy. They were right. What they hauled onto the deck wasn't treasure or the remains of an old ship. Rather, it was a 10,000-year-old spear point carved from deer antler, pulled from the bottom of the North Sea, a sea that had only existed for around 8,000 years. At first, it looked like a mistake, but then it happened again and again. Across the North Sea, fishermen kept hauling up the remains of another world. Ice Age mammoth tusks, antlers from giant deer that had vanished thousands of years earlier, flint blades shaped by people who had never lived anywhere near the sea. Fishermen working hundreds of miles apart kept dragging pieces of the same forgotten world onto their boats. As the discoveries multiplied, archaeologists stopped asking what the objects were and started asking where they had come from. The researchers turned to seismic surveys, originally collected by the offshore oil and gas industry. But rather than oil prospecting, researchers wanted to use the data to look for a lost world. The surveys revealed ancient river channels, forests, and glacial lakes buried beneath the seabed. Eventually, the evidence became impossible to ignore. There had never been an empty sea here. This used to be a country. A country so large, you could walk for days without ever seeing the ocean. It's hard to imagine now, but England wasn't always an island. 10,000 years ago, a vast landscape connected Britain to mainland Europe, a place filled with rivers and forests, lakes, and the people who called it home. You could have walked east for days without ever reaching the sea. Today, we call that place Doggerland. It wasn't a narrow strip of land connecting Britain to Europe. It covered nearly 100,000 square miles, about the size of Colorado. Rivers wound through forests of birch, pine, and hazel. Red deer moved between the trees. Birds crossed the open grasslands. Along the riverbanks, people built fires. They shaped flint into blades and carved spear points from red deer antler. The camps returned in the same places, generation after generation. But as the Ice Age ended, the water kept rising. Not all at once, but slowly enough that generation after generation noticed the shoreline moving inland. Rivers flooded, the wetlands spread, entire hunting grounds vanished beneath shallow water, and by around 8,000 years ago, most of Doggerland was gone. Then, off the coast of Norway, a massive section of the seabed collapsed. The landslide sent a tsunami surging across the North Sea toward what was left of Doggerland. These were not high islands protected by cliffs or mountains. They were flat, exposed, and directly in its path. Geologists now call it the Storegga Slide. Doggerland doesn't slowly fade from our archaeological record, it simply stops. The sea didn't erase a bridge between two countries, it swallowed an entire world. And for thousands of years, the North Sea kept it secret. If an entire country can disappear beneath one of the busiest seas on Earth, it's time to ask the question, what else is hiding below? Along India's western coast sits the modern city of Dwarka. For millions of people, it's one of the holiest places in Hindu tradition. According to one of India's oldest epics, it isn't the first city to stand there. For thousands of years, one story kept returning to this stretch of coastline. It described an extraordinary city beside the sea, surrounded by massive walls, lined with broad streets and crowded harbors. There were temples, palaces, and markets where merchants arrived from distant kingdoms. That story appears in the Mahabharata, one of India's greatest ancient epics. It tells of Krishna's city, swallowed by the sea until nothing remained above the surface. For centuries, most historians treated the account much like Atlantis, not as history, but as legend, a remarkable story, an unforgettable piece of literature. Probably only a story. Or so they said. By the late 1970s, Indian archaeologist S.R. Rao had spent years excavating Dwarka. The deeper he dug, the older the city became. Ancient walls appeared beneath newer ones. Layer after layer suggested the coastline had once been much further out. The city hadn't simply been rebuilt over time, the sea had been taken in piece by piece. Standing on the shoreline at the end of another excavation season, Raoul looked out across the Arabian Sea. If the coastline had moved this many times, what if the oldest part of Dwarka wasn't buried beneath the city after all? What if it was still out there, beneath the water? So instead of opening another trench on land, he hired divers. In December of 1984, a small survey vessel dropped anchor just offshore of Dwarka's sea god temple. The expedition had a single objective: locate submerged port installations, if any. They weren't searching for Atlantis, they simply wanted to know what was beneath the water. The divers descended carrying cameras and airlift hoses to clear away the sand. At first, there was nothing. Then a corner appeared, not rounded or broken, but a perfect right angle. They cleared away a little more. Another edge emerged. Raoul returned the following season. The sea had already begun reclaiming the site. Much of what the divers had uncovered the previous year was now buried beneath more than a meter of sand. They cleared it away and kept going. More than 100 massive stone blocks emerged from the seabed. Some extended beyond the walls mapped the year prior. Others appeared in entirely new places. Another expedition followed, then another. And by 1986, the ruins stretched nearly 700 meters from the modern shoreline. What had begun as a single wall had become 4 separate groups of underwater structures. Then the divers found something different. Not 1 or 2 objects, but dozens of massive triangular stone anchors, carved for thick ropes and heavy ships. One anchor could have been an accident. A few might have marked a single wreck, but dozens, well, that changes everything. The walls were no longer standing beside the sea. They were standing beside a port, and ports are built for cities. The discoveries didn't stop there. More harbor structures emerged from beneath the sand. Stone jetties stretched into the sea where ships had once loaded and unloaded their cargo. Then the divers found something much smaller, a carved stone seal, small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. Ancient descriptions of Dwarka say every citizen carried the city's official seal, a symbol of identity, similar to a modern-day passport. Its emblem was unmistakable, a 3-headed animal. As the last layer of sand fell away, the same figure appeared. It wasn't proof that they found Krishna's Dwarka. Archaeology can't answer a question like that. But once again, the evidence had arrived exactly where the story said it would. In the mid-1980s, commercial diving instructor Henry Cosquet heard rumors of a narrow underwater passage near Cap Morceo, off the coast of Marseille, France. Henry found himself 37 meters below the surface. He found a crack in the limestone that disappeared into darkness. The tunnel was barely wide enough for a diver to squeeze through. No one knew where it led. It wasn't mapped. It wasn't even discovered. In June of 1991, Cosquet surfaced into a chamber no one knew existed. He pulled himself onto the rock, watched water drip off the ceiling, and he switched on his flashlight. The cave glared back. He saw hands, dozens of them, pressed against the stone by people who had stood in that exact same place more than 27,000 years earlier. For a moment, it must have felt less like discovering a cave and more like interrupting someone else's. Only after the first shock faded did the details begin to emerge. Because these hands, they weren't painted. Someone had pressed their hand against the wall, blown pigment around it, and walked away. Cosquet had found a lost piece of history, one that was 22,000 years older than the Great Pyramids. For years, the cave remained Henry Cosquet's secret. Then 3 divers tried to reach it. The investigation that followed exposed the cave's existence, and before long, archaeologists were entering the chamber for the first time in thousands of years. Everyone expected to document a cave. Instead, they walked into one of the oldest art galleries to ever exist. As the lights moved deeper into the chamber, the cave kept changing. The first artists had left behind their hands, and there were dozens of them. Simple reminders that someone had once stood right there. But further inside, someone else had been drawing, not years later, but thousands of years later. Horses emerged from the stone, then bison, ibex, aurochs. Their bodies seemed to move beneath the charcoal. Whoever painted them wasn't learning how to paint. They already knew how to make the stone come alive. Then one image stopped everything. A bird, the great auk. A flightless seabird that disappeared forever in the 19th century. Its image had remained untouched on that cave wall for nearly 19,000 years. Today, scientists know the great auks once reached the Mediterranean, not because they found bones, because one person stopped just long enough to paint it, nearly 20,000 years ago. 27,000 years later, the hands are still making their arguments, only the language has been lost. Today, the Mediterranean is rising again. Little by little, the sea is reaching further into the chamber. Some of the paintings have already begun to disappear beneath the same water that sealed the cave for thousands of years. To protect what remains, France built a full-scale replica outside Marseille. The real cave waits beyond a flooded tunnel that grows a little longer every year. The hands are still there, the horses, the great auk, waiting in darkness, exactly where they were 27,000 years ago. Whoever pressed their hand against the wall never could have imagined the sea would one day seal the entrance. But after all this time, that single handprint, it's still there. For most of history, the horizon wasn't the end of the world. It was simply the edge of what people knew. Every generation believed they had seen almost everything. Then someone crossed a mountain or sailed beyond a coastline. Every map is only a snapshot of what we understand today. Beyond the edges of a map are forests that no one remembers, rivers that no longer exist, cities swallowed by the sea, handprints left by people whose names disappeared 27,000 years ago. The world has always been larger than our understanding of it, and it always will. Every generation gets the chance to prove the last one wrong. Wonder doesn't disappear because the world becomes smaller. It disappears the moment we convince ourselves that the map is finally finished. Fortunately, though, the map has been wrong before. And somewhere beneath the water tonight, history is still waiting to surprise us again.